Assembled Council, the moment we have prepared for is here. We must act with one purpose, one resolve. Witness the dawn of a new order. Your allegiance is now required.
The alarm did not simply ring. It tore through the pristine, crystalline acoustics of the Galactic Council chamber like a physical weapon. For 3,000 years, the central communication hub of the civilized galaxy had known nothing but the soft, harmonious chimes of diplomatic alerts. But this sound was different. It was harsh, guttural, a digital scream echoing from a terminal that had been sealed, powered down, and buried beneath layers of archival dust. Counselor Kale of the Xylar Directorate paused mid-sentence. His 6 multifaceted eyes blinked in a rare display of confusion. The Grand Assembly, representing thousands of star systems, fell into a suffocating silence. The terminal blinking at the center of the chamber was an ancient thing. It bore the designation of a quarantine sector. A sector no one had looked at, spoken of, or dared to approach for exactly 300 years. "Is this a malfunction?" Kael's voice was sharp, carrying the aristocratic sneer characteristic of his species. "Shut it down. We do not entertain phantom signals from dead worlds." But the automated defense grid did not respond. The Council's cybersecurity network, a marvel of quantum encryption that processed billions of threats a microsecond, was weeping. In exactly 7 minutes, the firewall that had stood unchallenged for millennia evaporated. It was not breached. It was dismantled cleanly and quietly, as if the intruder found the lock utterly insulting. The central holographic projector, a massive spire of light in the middle of the room, flickered. The elegant geometric patterns of the Council dissolved. In their place, a human face appeared. She was not what the historical archives depicted. The old records showed humans as desperate, bleeding, soot-stained primitives, screaming into the void as a rogue asteroid threatened to crack their Class 12 death world in half. The woman on the screen was none of those things. Her skin was a rich, dark bronze, her hair cropped with military precision. She wore a high-collared midnight blue uniform, devoid of medals or diplomatic finery. The only insignia was a silver patch on her shoulder, the silhouette of Earth cradled by a sword and an olive branch. Her eyes were what silenced the room. They were black pools of absolute terrifying calm. "Members of the Galactic Council," she said. Her voice was steady, perfectly modulated, and carried a rhythmic cadence that demanded total submission from the listener. "I am Ambassador Naomi Cross. I speak for the United Earth Alliance." Kale stepped forward, his crystalline skin shifting to a deep, angry crimson. "You are in violation of the Isolation Accords. Your species traded 3 centuries of quarantine for your survival. Disconnect immediately, primate, or face the orbital wrath of the combined fleets." Naomi Cross did not blink. She did not raise her voice. She simply tilted her head. "We are not here to negotiate with you, Counselor. Your security is inadequate. Your protocols are outdated, and your threats are meaningless." Before Kael could utter another word, the hologram shifted. It zoomed out, displaying the deep space coordinates just beyond the edge of the Council's sensor range. For a moment, there was nothing but the black abyss. Then the shadows moved. They did not warp in with brilliant flashes of light or majestic energy signatures. They simply bled out of the darkness. 47 vessels. They were jagged, brutalist monoliths of dark, light-absorbing armor. No glowing engine trails, no broadcasted transponders. They were absolute voids in space, heavily armed phantoms, waiting at the threshold of the civilized galaxy. "We kept our promise for 300 years. Naomi's voice echoed over the image of the silent predatory fleet. "Now we have come to collect the debt. Stay out of our way." "That is not a request." The transmission cut. The alarm ceased. But the silence that followed was heavier, suffocating the Council chamber. The monsters of the dark had woken up, and they had brought a fleet. 72 hours earlier, the mood on the command deck of the UEA diplomatic cruiser Vanguard was vastly different. Naomi Cross stood by the massive viewport, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. Below her lay the Valari homeworld, or rather, the ghost of it. 3 centuries ago, the Valari had been the jewel of this quadrant. They were a species of soaring intellect and deep compassion, possessing a society built on art, science, and a profound respect for life. When Earth was facing total annihilation from a rogue planet killer, the Valari were the only ones who answered the desperate radio signals. A Valari colony ship carrying 50,000 souls had diverted from its path. They knew their gravity engines were not built for the stress. They knew the maneuver would rip their vessel apart, but they engaged the tether anyway. They dragged the asteroid away from Earth, saving billions of human lives. In the process, the colony ship shattered. All 50,000 Valari burned in the atmosphere. Humanity wept, and humanity remembered. Now looking down at the Valari homeworld, Naomi felt a cold knot tighten in her chest. "Report," she said softly. Beside her, Commander Declan Pierce, a veteran of the United States Space Force, consulted his datapad. His jaw was clenched tight. Atmospheric scans confirm visual ambassador. The planetary grid is operating at less than 2% capacity. We are seeing massive urban decay. Entire megacities are dark. The orbital rings are abandoned, floating dead in space. It looks like a graveyard down there. "Population numbers?" Naomi asked, dreading the answer. Pierce swallowed hard. "At the time of our isolation, the Valari population was 14 billion. Current biometric sweeps across the entire globe show 193 million, and dropping. Fast. 14 billion to less than 200 million. It was not a war. There were no cratered ruins, no blasted landscapes. It was a slow, quiet extinction. The Valari called it the fading, an irreversible genetic degradation that halted reproduction and withered the young before they could reach maturity. The Galactic Council had declared it a tragic anomaly of natural evolution, quarantined the planet out of pity, and left them to die. "Prepare the shuttle," Naomi ordered. "We are going down." The landing platform at the Valari capital was a masterpiece of pale stone and sweeping arches designed to welcome thousands of dignitaries. Today it was empty, save for a small, fragile delegation. As the ramp of the human shuttle lowered, Naomi stepped out into the cool, still air. The silence of the city was deafening. There was no hum of traffic, no chatter of crowds, just the wind blowing through empty plazas. Waiting for her was Queen Lyra. The Valari leader stood tall, her iridescent scaled skin dulled by age and sorrow. Her forearms hung limply at her sides. She looked at the humans with large, weary eyes that had seen too much death. "You have broken your oath, children of Earth," Lyra said. Her voice, translated through Naomi's earpiece, was like dry leaves scraping across stone. "The Council will destroy you for leaving your system. And for what?" To visit a tomb, Naomi stepped forward. Her marine escort, heavily armed and clad in black tactical armor, fanned out behind her, securing the perimeter. But Naomi ignored the protocols. She walked directly to the Queen, stopping only a foot away. Then, to the absolute shock of the Valari delegation, the ambassador of the United Earth Alliance dropped to one knee. She bowed her head, the crisp fabric of her uniform snapping in the wind. 300 years ago, Naomi's voice rang out clear and unwavering. 50,000 of your people gave their lives so that mine might have a future. We did not forget. We carved their names into a monument of black marble in the center of our world. Every child born on Earth knows those names before they know how to walk." She looked up, meeting the Queen's astonished eyes. "You saved us. Now we save you. The debt is called due." Lyra's breath caught. A tremor ran through her fragile frame. "There is no saving us, human. The greatest medical minds of the Council tried for a century. The fading is woven into our very DNA. It is a flaw in our creation. We have accepted our end." Naomi stood up, her face a mask of iron resolve. "With respect, Your Majesty," Naomi said, "humans do not accept the impossible. We challenge it, and we brought someone who specializes in rewriting the rules." From the shadows of the shuttle, Dr. Silas Mercer emerged. He was a towering figure, broad-shouldered, with eyes that held the manic, brilliant energy of a man who rarely slept. He was the chief geneticist from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a man who had cured radiation sickness on the Martian colonies before his 30th birthday. He carried a heavy, reinforced metallic case containing processing power that rivaled a small star. "Point me to your medical archives," Mercer said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. I need tissue samples, generational genome maps, and 72 hours of absolute silence. The queen hesitated, looking at the towering humans. You will only find despair. I'll be the judge of that, Mercer replied. The Valari Central Medical Facility was a cathedral of sorrow. Endless rows of stasis beds lay empty, covered in dust. The few occupied wards were filled with the silence of the dying. For 96 hours, Silas Mercer did not leave the subterranean laboratory. He pumped his system full of chemical stimulants, his eyes locked onto the massive wraparound holographic displays. He had linked his portable quantum core directly to the Valari database, unleashing analytical algorithms originally designed by the Pentagon to crack alien encryption. Now those same algorithms were tearing apart the Valari genetic code, mapping billions of base pairs, searching for the anomaly. Naomi paced the observation deck above the lab. She watched Mercer work. He was a maestro of data, his hands weaving through the holographic strands of DNA, pulling them apart, zooming in on the molecular bonds, discarding terabytes of useless data. At the 80-hour mark, Mercer stopped. He froze. His hands hovering over the console began to tremble. Naomi immediately felt a shift in the room. The frantic, rhythmic clicking of his work had ceased. She descended the stairs rapidly, her boots echoing sharply against the metal grates. "Silas," she asked, her voice tight. "What is it? Did you find the flaw?" Mercer slowly turned around. His face was entirely drained of color. The usual manic spark in his eyes had been replaced by a deep, hollow horror. "It's not a flaw, Naomi," he whispered. He turned back to the console and swiped his hand, expanding a specific section of the DNA strand until it filled the entire room. It looked like a tangled web of blue light, but woven into the very center of it was a jagged, pulsing red sequence. "Look at the symmetry," Mercer said, his voice cracking. "Look at the absolute mathematical perfection of the degradation. Natural mutations are chaotic. They are messy. They leave evolutionary debris." He pointed a shaking finger at the red sequence. "This is clean. It's elegant. It triggers exactly during the reproductive cycle, creating a microscopic cascade failure in the telomeres. It was designed to look like a tragic accident of biology. It was designed to hide in the background while it slowly, quietly erased a 14 billion strong population from the universe." Naomi felt the air leave her lungs. The sheer scale of the atrocity hit her like a physical blow. "A bioweapon," she breathed. "A masterclass in genocide." Mercer corrected, his voice hardening into a low growl. "Administered roughly 280 years ago, just after they saved us, just after they lost their primary defense fleet." Naomi's mind raced. The Valari were pacifists, but their technology had been vastly superior. They were rising stars in the galactic community. Someone had seen them as a threat. Someone had decided to prune the garden. "Can you trace it?" Naomi asked. Her voice had dropped an octave. It was no longer the voice of a diplomat. It was the voice of a predator assessing a blood trail. Mercer nodded grimly. "When you build a weapon this complex, you leave a signature. You can't help it. The synthesis of this protein chain requires a specific type of crystalline refraction matrix. There is only one species in the known galaxy that uses this method of genetic engineering." He tapped a key. The red sequence twisted, forming a complex geometric crest. "The Xylar Directorate," Mercer said. The silence in the laboratory was absolute. The Xylar, one of the founding members of the Galactic Council, the self-proclaimed arbiters of civilized warfare and cosmic justice, Counselor Kael's people. They had smiled at the Valari in the assembly halls, offered their deepest condolences as the species withered away, all while knowing they had pulled the trigger. They had murdered 14 billion innocent people, thinking no one would ever be smart enough or care enough to look closer. Naomi closed her eyes. She thought of the 50,000 Valari burning in Earth's atmosphere. She thought of the empty playgrounds outside. She thought of Queen Lyra's broken, hopeless eyes. When she opened her eyes, the diplomat was dead. Only the commander remained. "Silas, can you synthesize a cure?" Mercer looked at the data. He took a deep breath. "It will take time. The degradation is deep. But yes, the algorithm has isolated the synthetic sequence. I can build a retrovirus to hunt it down and overwrite it. I can save them." "Do it," Naomi said. "I don't care what you need. Pull power from the ship, tear apart the medbay, use everything. Get it done." She turned on her heel and marched out of the laboratory. Commander Pierce was waiting in the corridor. He took one look at her face and instinctively straightened his posture, his hand dropping to the sidearm at his hip. "Ambassador," Pierce asked cautiously. "It was Murder Declan," Naomi said, her voice a chilling whisper that echoed down the quiet halls. "The Xylar poisoned them. They executed a stealth genocide to maintain their seat of power." Pierce's eyes widened, then narrowed into slits of pure professional rage. "Orders, ma'am!" Naomi walked past him, heading straight for the communication relay. "Get me a secure, tight beam channel to the edge of the system," she commanded. "I need to speak to the Admiral." Seconds later, the holographic projector in the communication room flared to life. The image of Admiral Gideon Thorne materialized. He was standing on the bridge of the flagship Aegis. He was a man carved from granite, his face lined with the scars of Earth's brutal internal resource wars before the unification. He wore the black uniform of the Space Force, a stark contrast to his silver-cropped hair. "Ambassador Cross," Thorne said, his voice like grinding tectonic plates. "We monitored your broadcast to the Council. The fleet is holding position. We are undetected, but the Xylar border patrols are increasing their sweeps." "Admiral Thorne," Naomi said, "we have the data. Doctor. Mercer has confirmed it is a synthetic bioweapon. The Xylar Directorate is responsible for the systemic extermination of the Valari species." Thorne did not react immediately. He processed the information. He looked down at a console, out of frame, then looked back at Naomi. 14 billion, Mr. Thorne stated softly. It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement of the scale of the crime. "Yes," Naomi said. "And the cure? Mercer is synthesizing it now. The Valari will survive. But the Xylar believe they have gotten away with the perfect crime. They believe they are untouchable." Thorne leaned forward, his hands resting on the holographic projector. The ambient red light of his command bridge cast long, demonic shadows across his scarred face. "What are your orders, Ambassador?" Naomi looked at the man who commanded the single most destructive armada humanity had ever assembled. 300 years of paranoid, obsessive preparation. 300 years of turning a death world's violent history into a refined, industrialized war machine. "Admiral," Naomi said, her voice perfectly calm, perfectly cold, "take the fleet across the border. Cut their communication lines, blind their orbital defense grids, and when you have their attention—" She paused, the image of Queen Lyra flashing in her mind. "Remind them why they were so afraid of us in the first place." Thorne's lips curled into a tight, dangerous smile. It was the smile of a hound that had finally been let off its leash. "Understood, Ambassador. Spooling up the dark matter drives now. We will show them the wrath of the death world." The hologram flickered and died. Naomi stood alone in the dim room. Outside the window, the dying sun of the Valari system cast long, desperate shadows across the empty city. The galaxy had thought humanity was a frightened animal, hiding in its cave for 3 centuries. They did not understand that humanity had not been hiding. They had been forging armor. They had been sharpening swords. The Xylar thought they were the apex predators of the cosmos. They thought they controlled the fate of billions from their pristine, crystalline towers. They were about to learn that there was always a bigger monster in the dark, and this one had come to collect. Space is a silent medium. It does not carry the roar of engines or the concussive blast of dying starships. But to the Xylar border guards stationed at the crystalline outpost of Ethel Prime, the silence was about to become deafening. Commander Vex of the Xylar Directorate rested his 4 hands on the sleek, glowing console of his command deck. His 40 patrol cruisers formed a perfect geometric grid above the glittering orbital shipyards. The Xylar did not build warships. They built flying monuments to their own superiority. Their vessels were elegant spikes of light-refracting polymers and plasma sails designed to project dominance without ever needing to prove it. For 2,000 years, no one had dared attack a Xylar outpost. Then the proximity alarms began to sing. It was not a blaring siren, but a dissonant, frantic chime that meant the outpost's quantum sensors were failing to parse the data they were receiving. "Readings," Vex snapped, his multifaceted eyes narrowing. "Spatial displacement, Commander," his sensor officer replied, her voice trembling. "Massive gravity distortions. Just outside the exclusion zone. But there are no thermal signatures, no plasma trails, no engine heat." "A malfunction," Vex declared with absolute certainty. Reset the grid. I am resetting it, sir. The anomaly remains. It is bleeding into the visual spectrum. Vex looked at the main viewport. Deep space is a canvas of absolute black dotted with the cold light of distant stars. But right in front of them, the blackness was shifting. It was as if the void itself was taking shape, hardening into jagged, brutal silhouettes. 47 monoliths of pitch-black metal decloaked in perfect, terrifying unison. They were not elegant, they were not beautiful. They were slabs of dark matter-infused titanium and composite armor bristling with heavy, protruding barrels. They looked like anvils forged in the heart of a dying sun. They had no glowing windows, no exposed bridges. They were flying bunkers. A communication channel forced its way through the Xylar's unbreakable encryption. It didn't bypass the firewall, it simply crushed it. The voice that filled the Xylar command deck was deep, resonant, and entirely devoid of emotion. This is Admiral Gideon Thorne of the United Earth Alliance. You are harboring the architects of a biological genocide. Lower your shield's power, down your weapons, and transmit the surrender codes of your high command. You have 60 seconds. Vex scoffed. His crystalline skin shifted to a bright, mocking yellow. A death worlder, Vex sneered to his crew. A primate in a metal box. They actually think their primitive toys can threaten a directorate outpost. He activated his comms. Earth vessel, you are in restricted space. Turn back immediately or be reduced to atomic vapor. Your primitive hulls cannot withstand our phased plasma. 30 seconds, Thorne's voice replied evenly. You have 40 ships against my defensive grid and orbital batteries. Vex spat. We outgun you, outmaneuver you, and outclass you. Fire a single shot, and your species will face a second quarantine. A permanent one. 10 seconds. Vex slammed his hand onto the firing console. Let them burn. Open fire. All batteries target the lead vessel. Space lit up. 40 Xylar cruisers unleashed a torrential barrage of phased plasma and antimatter beams. The energy lanced across the void brilliant spears of blinding white and neon blue, all converging on the lead human flagship, the Aegis. It was a staggering display of firepower. Enough energy to boil an ocean in a matter of seconds. The beams struck the Aegis dead center. On the Xylar bridge, the crew braced for the inevitable explosion. They waited for the human ship to shatter into a million glowing fragments. But the explosion never came. As the plasma cleared, the Aegis remained. It had not moved. It had not staggered. But it had changed. The pitch-black hull of the human ship was glowing, but not from heat. The surface of the armor was rippling like water. Report, Vex shouted, the yellow fading from his skin, replaced by a pale, terrified white. Why are they not destroyed? Did our beams miss? Direct hit, Commander, the sensor officer screamed. But their hull, it's eating the energy. It's an adaptive molecular lattice. The kinetic and thermal energy of our weapons is being absorbed by billions of microsensors. Their armor is rapidly rearranging its molecular structure. Sir, the more we shoot them, the denser their armor becomes. They just harden their forward plating by 300%. Vex stared at the screen in absolute horror. That's impossible. That defies the laws of thermodynamics. Humans don't care about your laws, a voice whispered in his mind. On board the Aegis, deep within the heavily armored citadel of the gunnery deck, Lieutenant David Cole wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. The deck was bathed in the harsh red light of combat conditions. It smelled of ozone machine oil and cold adrenaline. Cole didn't have a window. He didn't need one. He was strapped into a gyroscopic targeting chair. His neural implants directly linked to the ship's macro cannons. Armor has absorbed the enemy volley, the automated voice of the ship's AI droned. Structural integrity at 99.8%. Energy dispersed. Cole gripped the dual firing yokes. He had trained for this moment for 10 years. Every day in the simulators. Every day studying the arrogant, fragile designs of the Council fleets. The aliens built ships to fight energy wars. They built shields designed to deflect lasers, plasma, and radiation. They had entirely forgotten how to fight a species that liked to throw rocks. Firing solution locked, Cole reported, his voice dead calm. You are cleared, hot lieutenant. Admiral Thorne's voice crackled in his earpiece. Show them what kinetic energy looks like. Cole squeezed the triggers. There was no flashy laser beam. There was no elegant pulse of light. There was only a bone-rattling thud that vibrated through the entire spine of the Aegis. The ship's magnetic railguns running along the entire length of the hull accelerated 2-ton slugs of depleted uranium and tungsten to fractional light speed. In the void, the slugs were entirely invisible. They traveled too fast for the naked eye. They struck the Xylar shields. Energy shields operate on frequency modulation. They are designed to diffuse energy over a wide surface area, but a tungsten slug moving at a fraction of the speed of light doesn't carry thermal energy. It carries raw, unadulterated mass and momentum. The Xylar shield didn't just fail. It shattered like a pane of glass struck by a sledgehammer. The slug tore through the shield, punched a perfectly round hole through the crystalline hull of the Xylar cruiser, exited the other side, and kept going into deep space. For a fraction of a second, the Xylar ship hung there pristine. Then the sudden decompression and the violent transfer of kinetic energy caught up. The cruiser violently imploded, collapsing in on itself before detonating outward in a silent, spectacular bloom of shattered crystal and frozen atmosphere. Target 1 destroyed, Cole breathed, already shifting his yokes, reacquiring. Thud, thud, thud. The human fleet opened up. It was a slaughter. The Xylar cruisers designed for graceful long-range energy duels found themselves in a back-alley brawl with a monster wielding a shotgun. The kinetic slugs tore through their formations. Ships were sheared in half. Engineering sections were obliterated. In exactly 4 minutes, 12 Xylar warships were reduced to a drifting cloud of high-velocity shrapnel. "They're tearing us apart," the Xylar sensor officer shrieked. Vex fell back into his command chair. "Sound the retreat. Fall back to the planetary grid. Send an emergency override to High Command. We need the Grand Armada." 80 light-years away in the towering spire of the Xylar Directorate on their homeworld, Grand Dictator Kyle watched the telemetry feed with a growing sense of nausea. The pristine, sterile war room was dead silent. The holographic display in the center of the room replayed the destruction of the border outpost on a loop. 12 ships, 4 minutes. It was a statistical impossibility. Beside Kyle stood Zek, the Directorate's chief military analyst. Zek's 6 eyes were wide, tracing the tactical data pouring in from the wreckage. "They are not using civilized weaponry," Zek whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. "They are using solid mass, accelerated projectiles. It is barbaric, it is incredibly inefficient, and our shields cannot stop it." Kyle ground his teeth together. The red hue of rage flared across his crystalline skin. "They are primitives. They caught Vex by surprise. It will not happen again. Mobilize the Grand Armada. All of it." Zek turned sharply. "Dictator, wait. You do not understand what you are looking at. The energy signatures radiating from their engine cores, it is astronomical. A single one of their ships contains enough power to rival our orbital sun forges. We cannot engage them in open combat." "They have 47 ships, Zek," Kale roared, slamming his fist onto the console. "We have 600. I will not have the Directorate humiliated by a species of dirt-scratching apes who just crawled out of a 300-year quarantine. Send the Armada. Surround them, burn them to ashes." Zek looked back at the holographic projection of the pitch-black human ships. He saw the cold, calculated way they moved. He saw the brutal efficiency of their fire. "You are sending our fleet into a meat grinder," Zek said softly, but his warning fell on deaf ears. Within the hour, the void space outside the Xylar border erupted with light. 600 Xylar warships folded out of hyperspace. They formed a massive glowing wall of power, a crescent moon of crystalline spikes in plasma batteries that dwarfed the small cluster of dark human vessels. It was a ratio of more than 10 to 1. The comms channel opened. It was Kyle broadcasting directly from the homeworld. "United Earth Alliance," Kale's voice boomed with arrogant triumph. "You have played your hand. You have managed a lucky strike against an unprepared patrol. But your luck ends here. You are surrounded. Power down your primitive engines and prepare to be boarded. You will be tried for war crimes against the Directorate." On the bridge of the Aegis, Admiral Thorne listened to the broadcast. He didn't look at the screen. He was looking at the tactical map. 600 red dots surrounding 47 green ones. "Are the dampeners online?" Thorne asked the deck officer. "Inertial dampeners at 100%. The crew has initiated liquid breathing protocols. Gravity suits are locked. Thorne nodded slowly. He tapped the comms button. Dictator Kale, Thorne said, you seem to misunderstand the situation. We are not locked in here with you. Thorne's eyes narrowed into slits of cold iron. You are locked in here with us. All ships. Break formation. Engage evasive maneuvers. Fire at will. The human fleet exploded into motion. In naval combat among the civilized species, ships moved like majestic galleons. They drifted, they turned slowly, they maintained tight formations to maximize shield overlaps. Space combat was a slow, deliberate chess match. The humans played it like a knife fight in a phone booth. The 47 black ships broke apart, accelerating at a speed that defied the laws of biology. They pulled maneuvers that would instantly liquefy the internal organs of any known species. They banked, rolled, and died at 70, 80, 90 Gs of force. Inside the cockpits and gunnery decks, the human crews were encased in specialized pressure suits, their lungs filled with oxygenated fluorocarbons, their bodies suspended in shock-absorbing gel. It was agonizing, brutal on the human body, but it allowed them to move in ways the aliens simply could not comprehend. The Xylar targeting computers panicked. They were designed to calculate the trajectories of civilized ships. They could not track the chaotic, hyper-aggressive, erratic flight paths of the Earth vessels. The human ships wove through the incoming barrage of plasma fire like ghosts. Beams of energy passed harmlessly through empty space where a human ship had been a microsecond before. And then the humans closed the distance. They didn't stay at range. They charged straight into the heart of the Xylar Armada. It was point-blank annihilation. The Aegis rammed straight through the defensive line. Lieutenant Cole's cannons roared, firing slugs into Xylar cruisers at such close range that the shrapnel pelted the Aegis's own shields. Ships were detonating left and right, but the Xylar had numbers. They began to tighten the net. Slowly, the overwhelming volume of plasma fire began to scorch the human armor. The adaptive lattice could only absorb so much before it began to superheat. Armor temperatures rising, the AI warned on Thorne's bridge. We are sustaining superficial damage across the fleet. Thorne watched the tactical map. The Xylar had clustered together, trying to trap the fast-moving human ships in a cage of overlapping fire. It was exactly what Thorne had been waiting for. They've bunched up, Thorne said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. They haven't read our history. They don't know what we do when we want to clear a room. Thorne turned to his weapons officer. Unlock the vault. The weapons officer swallowed hard, his hands flying across the console. He lifted a physical red cover and inserted a key. Thorne did the same on his command chair. Authorization confirmed. Radiation payloads primed. On the homeworld, Zek saw the energy spike on his monitors. His 6 eyes widened in absolute paralytic dread. Dictator Kale, Zek screamed, abandoning all protocol. Order the fleet to scatter, now scatter. What is it? Kale demanded, startled by the analyst's panic. They are unlocking atomic fire. They are using radiation. Kale froze. That's impossible. Radiation weapons were banned by the Geneva Accords of the Galactic Senate 5,000 years ago. No species would dare. They aren't from the Senate, Zek shrieked. They are from a death world. They don't have our rules. In the void, the human fleet unleashed hell. They did not fire traditional nuclear missiles that exploded in spherical bursts. Humanity had spent 300 years perfecting the art of directed destruction. They fired shaped atomic charges. Dozens of sleek silver missiles shot out from the human ships, diving into the densest clusters of the Xylar Armada. When they detonated, there was no sound, but space itself seemed to tear open. Brilliant, blinding pillars of pure white atomic fire lanced through the void. They were concentrated beams of raw nuclear fury, unhindered by atmosphere, sweeping across the Xylar formations. The Xylar energy shields were designed to stop plasma. They were utterly useless against high-yield concentrated gamma radiation and thermal shockwaves. The cruisers caught in the beams didn't shatter. They simply ceased to exist. The radiation flashed through the crystalline hulls, instantly vaporizing the crews inside and melting the ships down to slag. The Xylar Armada began to disintegrate. It was not a battle anymore. It was an extermination. On the tactical map, the red dots began to vanish. not one by one, but in clusters of 10, 20, 50 at a time. The Xylar command frequencies degenerated into pure chaotic screaming. Commanders begged for mercy. Ships tried to activate their hyperdrives to flee, but the human targeting computers locked onto their engine flares and sniped them out of the void with kinetic slugs before they could jump. In exactly 18 minutes, 340 Xylar warships that were vaporized into floating clouds of radioactive dust. The remaining 200 ships of the Grand Armada drifted, their power cores deactivated, their weapons offline. They were playing dead. It was the only way to survive. The void fell silent once more. The 47 black ships of the United Earth Alliance drifted slowly through the graveyard of the Xylar's pride. They were scorched, their armor glowing a dull, angry red from the heat of the battle, but not a single human ship had been lost. On Xylar Prime, the command center was a tomb. Kale stood at his console, his crystalline body completely devoid of color. He looked like a fragile piece of glass about to shatter. The Grand Armada, the invincible sword of the Directorate, had been broken in less than half an hour. "Sir," a technician whispered, her voice choking with tears. "The human flagship. It is in low orbit. It has bypassed the planetary defense grid." Kale looked up at the main screen. The Aegis filled the sky above their capital city. The massive black underside of the ship was slowly opening, revealing a primary weapon array that glowed with a sickening radioactive blue light. "They have locked targeting lasers on the capital," Zek said, his voice hollow, accepting the end. "They have locked on to the orbital shipyards, the power grid, the civilian centers. They are going to wipe us out, just like we did far into the Valari." Kale closed his eyes. He had played the game of gods, deciding who lived and who died in the galaxy. Now the devil had come to his doorstep. "Send the surrender broadcast," Kale whispered, defeated. Tell them we yield." On the bridge of the Aegis, Admiral Thorne watched the targeting reticles turn red as they locked onto the sprawling, glittering cities of the Xylar, our homeworld. "Targeting solutions confirmed," the weapons officer reported. "We have firing lines on their major population centers. Casualties estimated in the low billions. Awaiting your order, Admiral." Thorne stood up. He walked to the main viewport and looked down at the planet. It was beautiful. A blue and green marble, not entirely unlike Earth. He thought about the orders he had been given. He thought about the 300 years his people had spent trapped in their own solar system, preparing for a war they hoped would never come. He thought about the Valari children dying slowly in empty hospitals. His finger hovered over the executive firing stud. The urge to press it to erase the species that had committed such a cold, calculated genocide was a physical ache in his bones. It would be so easy. It would be justice. But then he pulled his hand back. He keyed the global comms channel, broadcasting his voice to every screen, every radio, every communication device on the planet below. "People of the Xylar Directorate," Thorne's voice thundered from the heavens. "Look up at your sky and look at the fleet that hangs above your homes. Understand that your lives, your cities, your entire history currently rests on the tip of my finger." In the streets of the capital, millions of Xylar looked up at the massive black ships, paralyzed by an existential terror they had never known. "Your leaders," Thorne continued, "orchestrated the slow, agonizing murder of 14 billion Valari. They did it in secret. They did it out of cowardice. By your own laws of war, by the laws of the universe, you deserve to burn." Kale, listening in his command center, fell to his knees. "But," Thorne's voice softened just a fraction, echoing with a terrible heavy restraint, "we are humanity. We are the monsters from the death world. We are the apex predators you whispered about in the dark. And because we are predators, we know the difference between a hunt and a slaughter." Thorne turned back to his weapons officer. "Cancel targeting on all civilian centers," Thorne ordered. "Reprogram firing solutions. Target only the orbital military docks, the planetary defense cannons, and the high command military bunkers. Surgical strikes only, no collateral damage." "Aye, Admiral." Firing. The Aegis did not unleash atomic fire on the cities. Instead, pinpoint lasers of concentrated kinetic energy rained down from orbit. They struck with surgical precision. The orbital shipyards shattered. The planetary defense cannons were turned into smoking craters. The military infrastructure of the Directorate was systematically, methodically dismantled in front of the eyes of their own people. Not a single civilian building was touched. Not a single hospital, school, or residential sector was harmed. It was a display of power far more terrifying than total annihilation. It was absolute, undeniable control. When the dust settled, Thorne opened the channel one last time. "We do not murder innocents." Thorne said, his voice leaving a chill that would linger on the Xylar homeworld for 1,000 years. "We are not you. You will transmit the complete data sequence for the biological weapon you created. You will surrender the architects of the genocide to the United Earth Alliance. You will disarm. And if you ever threaten a friend of humanity again—" Thorne paused, letting the silence hang in the void. "You will not have a homeworld left to surrender. This is your only warning. Choose your next moves very carefully." The transmission cut. The black ships held their position in orbit, silent sentinels of a new era. In the medical labs of the Valari homeworld, Dr. Silas Mercer received the unencrypted data packet from the Xylar High Command. He plugged it into a sequencer. The final puzzle pieces clicked into place. The cure was complete. And in the great halls of the Galactic Council, Ambassador Naomi Cross stood quietly waiting. The galaxy had just learned that the sleeping giant had not only woken up, but it possessed a terrifying moral compass. The age of the Council's quiet corruption was over. The era of the Death World protectors had begun. The microscopic war was over before the galaxy even realized it had begun. Inside the subterranean medical cathedral of the Valari homeworld, the air was thick with an exhausted, heavy silence. The harsh, sterile lights of the laboratory reflected off the dark, heavy bags beneath Dr. Silas Mercer's eyes. He had not slept in 6 days. His hands, usually steady enough to splice atoms, trembled slightly as he held a simple, clear vial of blue liquid. It did not look like salvation. It looked like colored water. But inside that vial were billions of synthetic, aggressive retroviruses coated with a singular, ruthless directive: hunt down the Xylar genetic poison and consume it. Queen Lara stood on the other side of the reinforced glass, her forearms resting against the partition. Beside her lay a Valari child in a stasis pod. The boy was small, his iridescent scales pale and flaking, his chest barely rising. He was in the final stages of the fading. His cellular structure was tearing itself apart, honoring the quiet execution order written by the Xylar 3 centuries ago. Mercer did not ask for permission. He did not offer empty comfort. He simply walked to the pod, attached the vial to the intravenous port, and pressed the pressure seal. The blue liquid vanished into the child's bloodstream. For 10 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The monitors continued their slow, rhythmic, dying crawl. The Queen closed her eyes, preparing for the flatline she had heard millions of times before. She prepared for the end of her world. Then the machine hitched. It was a small sound, a slight elevation in the pitch of the heart monitor. Mercer leaned over the primary display, his bloodshot eyes widening. The algorithms were tracking the retrovirus in real time. On the holographic projection, the invasive, mathematically perfect red sequence of the Xylar bioweapon was being systematically devoured. The blue human code was tearing through it with terrifying predatory efficiency, rewriting the broken telomeres, binding the genetic lattice back together with brute engineered force. The boy on the table took a sudden, sharp gasp of air. It was not the weak, rattling breath of the dying. It was deep. It was desperate. It was the sound of a drowning victim breaking the surface of the water. Color, vibrant and sudden, flushed across his pale scales. The sickly gray gave way to a brilliant, shifting azure. His eyes fluttered open, bright and clear, focusing on the massive human leaning over him. Queen Lyra collapsed against the glass. Her legs simply ceased to function. She slid to the floor, her hands covering her face as a sound tore from her throat. It was a sound of absolute, overwhelming grief colliding with an impossible hope. It was the sound of a mother and a monarch realizing her children were not going to turn to dust. Mercer stepped back from the pod. He looked at his own shaking hands, then looked up at the observation deck where Ambassador Naomi Cross stood in the shadows. He didn't smile. He just gave her a single slow nod. The cure worked. The Valari would live. Naomi turned her back to the medical bay and walked out into the corridor. Her face was set in stone. Saving the Valari was only the first half of the debt. The second half required a reckoning. Hundreds of light years away, the skies over the Xylar homeworld were dominated by the suffocating presence of the human fleet. The 47 monolithic black ships held a geosynchronous orbit, casting long, unnatural shadows across the pristine, crystalline cities below. The orbital shipyards were gone, reduced to drifting fields of hot slag. The planetary defense cannons were smoking craters. But the cities themselves remained untouched, a testament to a terrifying surgical restraint. On the surface, the illusion of Xylar supremacy was being physically dismantled. Lieutenant David Cole did not walk with the grace of a diplomat. He walked with the heavy thudding rhythm of a United Earth Alliance Marine wearing 800 pounds of mechanized combat armor. The gravity of the Xylar homeworld was light, making the human troops feel as though they could tear the buildings down with their bare hands. Cole and his squad marched up the sweeping glass-like stairs of the Xylar Directorate High Command. The Xylar elite guards, clad in their ceremonial armor, stood at the entrance holding phased plasma rifles. They were trembling. They had watched their invincible Grand Armada evaporate in 18 minutes. They had watched the sky burn. As Cole approached his visor, a faceless slab of polarized obsidian, he didn't even raise his weapon. He simply kept walking. The psychological weight of the human presence was too much. The Xylar guards dropped their weapons. The rifles clattered against the crystal floor. They fell to their knees, bowing their heads, terrified that any sudden movement would invite the atomic fire from above. Cole stepped over the rifles. He keyed the door override, and the massive gates of the High Command blew inward with a compressed hiss of hydraulics. Inside the Grand Chamber, Dictator Kael sat on his elevated throne. The room was dark, the power grid severed by the surgical strikes from orbit. The only light came from the emergency strips and the red glow of Cole's tactical visor. "You have no jurisdiction here," Kael whispered into the darkness. His multifaceted eyes were wide, reflecting the imposing mechanical silhouettes of the human Marines fanning out across his throne room. "I am a sovereign leader of a founding species of the Galactic Council. You cannot do this." Cole stopped at the base of the throne. He reached up, unsealed his helmet, and pulled it off, letting it lock onto his magnetic hip mount. He wanted the alien to look him in the eyes. "My jurisdiction is the fleet currently pointing orbital railguns at your ceiling," Cole said. His voice was flat, devoid of the theatrical anger the Xylar were used to in galactic politics. It was the voice of a bill collector. "You murdered 14 billion people in their sleep. You don't get a throne anymore." Cole took the steps two at a time. Kael tried to stand to summon some final shred of aristocratic dignity, but the sheer physical mass of the human was paralyzing. Cole grabbed Kael by the collar of his ceremonial robes. The alien was incredibly fragile, his hollow-boned physiology designed for a gentle, pampered existence. Cole could have crushed his neck with a twitch of his wrist. "Walk," Cole ordered, turning the dictator toward the doors, "or I will drag you. The ambassador is waiting." The Galactic Council chamber was tearing itself apart. For 300 years, the vast circular amphitheater had been a place of quiet, polite debates. Wars were fought with sanctions, trade embargoes, and elegant speeches. Now it was a madhouse. Representatives from 2,000 star systems were shouting their translators, struggling to keep up with the cacophony of panicked dialects. The holographic projector in the center of the room was looping the telemetry data downloaded from the Xylar border patrols. They watched over and over again as the primitive kinetic weapons of the human fleet punched through energy shields as if they did not exist. They watched the atomic fire erase the most advanced armada in the known universe in less than 20 minutes. "They are barbarians!" The representative of the Helix Federation shrieked, his tendrils thrashing. "They used radiation. They used unguided mass. This is a violation of every treaty signed since the dawn of interstellar flight." "They didn't sign your treaties," another voice roared back. "We locked them in a cage for 3 centuries. We left them in the dark, and they learned to see in it." The presiding speaker, an ancient, towering avian, slammed his gavel against the podium, a sound like a cracking whip. "Order, the council will have order. We must mobilize the combined defensive fleets. If the Xylar Directorate has fallen, the Earth Alliance will surely march on the core worlds next. We must strike before their armada regroups." "Strike them at a cynical voice echoed from the lower tiers. "Our shields cannot stop their weapons. Our hulls cannot withstand their mass. We are scholars and merchants holding glass swords against a species that forged itself on a Class 12 death world. The speaker raised his gavel again, preparing to call for an emergency mobilization vote. He never brought the gavel down. The main doors of the council chamber, massive slabs of reinforced durasteel designed to withstand a siege, did not open. They detonated. The explosive breach charges vaporized the locking mechanisms in a blinding flash of white light and a concussive shockwave that knocked the closest representatives out of their hoverpods. Smoke billowed into the pristine chamber, smelling of sulfur, burned ozone, and violence. The shouting stopped instantly. 2,000 alien delegates froze in absolute breathless terror. Through the thick, rolling smoke, a vanguard of United Earth Alliance Marines marched into the chamber. They moved in perfect, terrifying synchronization. Their heavy boots struck the floor in a rhythmic cadence that sounded like the ticking of a doomsday clock. They formed two impenetrable walls of black armor down the center aisle, their heavy pulse rifles held across their chests. The Council security forces, armed with elegant shock batons and stun pistols, did not even attempt to intervene. They backed away, recognizing apex predators when they saw them. When the corridor was secure, the smoke parted, and Ambassador Naomi Cross walked into the light. She was no longer a hologram. She was flesh and bone, standing in the heart of galactic power. Her dark blue uniform was crisp, the silver Earth insignia gleaming under the chamber's spotlights. Her face was a mask of cold, uncompromising authority. But it was who she brought with her that sent a collective gasp rippling through the massive amphitheater. Flanked by Lieutenant Cole Dictator Kale, stumbled down the aisle. The supreme leader of the Xylar Directorate, one of the 5 ruling voices of the entire galaxy, was wearing heavy magnetic shackles on all 4 of his wrists. His crystalline skin was dull gray and completely broken. Behind him walked Zek, the chief analyst, and 3 of the top geneticists from the Xylar weapon labs, all chained, all stripped of their finery. Naomi did not walk to the speaker's podium. She walked to the very center of the room, directly into the holographic projection of the destroyed Xylar fleet. She stopped. She reached into her coat, pulled out a dense metallic data drive, and dropped it onto the glass floor. It hit with a heavy ringing thud that echoed into the highest tiers of the chamber. "You want order?" Naomi said. Her voice was not amplified by a microphone, but it carried perfectly through the vast room, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "There is your order." The avian speaker swallowed hard, his feathers bristling. "Ambassador Cross, you have committed an unprovoked act of war against a founding member of this council. You have brought armed combatants into a sacred diplomatic sanctuary. You are demanding your own destruction." Naomi looked up at the speaker. The absolute lack of fear in her dark eyes made the ancient alien take an involuntary step back from his podium. "Unprovoked," Naomi repeated softly, testing the word. She tapped a code into her wrist console. The holographic projector shifted. The image of the burning Xylar fleet vanished. In its place, the chamber was filled with the genetic sequence of the Valeri fading. The red jagged line of the synthetic poison pulsed in the air above them. Beside it, the data files scrolled rapidly. The manufacturing logs, the deployment schedules, the cover-up directives, all bearing the encrypted digital signature of the Xylar High Command. 300 years ago, Naomi's voice rose, filling the space with righteous, barely contained fury. A species of pacifists sacrificed 50,000 of their own to save our world from an asteroid. They died so we could live. And how did this civilized, enlightened council repay them? She pointed a finger directly at Kael, who cowered under the weight of thousands of eyes. "You let him murder them. You let the Xylar engineer a microscopic assassin. You watched the Valari population plummet from 14 billion to less than 200 million. You called it a tragedy of nature. You quarantined them. You turned your backs and let them rot in the dark because their technology threatened Xylar profit margins." The chamber erupted into murmurs of horror and denial. Representatives glared at Kale, who could not meet their gaze. "We did not know," the Helix representative shouted, his voice defensive. "The Directorate hid the evidence. The Council would never sanction a genocide." "Ignorance is not an alibi," Naomi fired back, her voice cracking like a whip. "You didn't know because you didn't care to look. You didn't look because the Valari were weak and the Xylar were strong. You call yourselves a civilization. You are a cartel, a bureaucracy built on the bones of anyone who doesn't fit into your neat, profitable algorithms. She stepped away from the hologram, pacing like a caged panther in the center of the room. We spent 3 centuries in isolation, Naomi continued. We used that time to look inward. We cured our diseases. We ended our internal wars. We learned how to control the violence that made us a death world species. We truly prayed that when we finally stepped out into the stars, we would find a galaxy of peers. We hoped to find a universe of light. She stopped looking up at the thousands of alien faces staring down at her. Instead, we found monsters wearing diplomatic robes. We found cowards. The Speaker of the Council leaned forward, his voice trembling. The evidence was undeniable. The Xylar had broken the most sacred laws of life. The political landscape of the galaxy was shattering in real time. The evidence is compelling, the speaker stammered, trying to regain control of the narrative. If this is true, the Directorate will face tribunal. But your methods, Ambassador, your weapons, you possess a capacity for violence that is a threat to the stability of the entire network. However, given your service in uncovering this atrocity, the Council is willing to offer the United Earth Alliance a compromise. Naomi raised an eyebrow. A compromise? Yes, the speaker said, sensing an opening. Surrender your atomic technologies to the Council inspectors. Dismantle the kinetic railguns. In exchange, the Earth Alliance will be granted the seat vacated by the Xylar. You will become a founding voice. You will join us in the light. You will be our sword. It was the ultimate prize. A seat at the apex of galactic power. Control over trade routes, resources, and laws that govern trillions of lives. For any other species, it was a dream that took millennia to achieve. Naomi Cross looked at the speaker. She looked at the empty seat of the Xylar. She looked at the terrified, calculating faces of the alien politicians. Then she laughed. It was a quiet, bitter sound, but in the dead silence of the chamber, it was the most terrifying thing anyone had heard. You still don't understand, Naomi said, shaking her head. You think we want your chair. You think we want to sit in a room and vote on who gets to live and who gets to die. She turned her back on the speaker, walking slowly back toward the blast doors, her Marines parting to let her through. We reject your seat. We reject your authority. The United Earth Alliance will remain an independent power. We will trade with who we wish. We will travel where we please. You cannot stand alone, a voice cried out from the crowd. You are one system. You have 47 ships. The combined fleets of the Council number in the tens of thousands. If you defy us, we will overwhelm you by sheer attrition. Naomi stopped at the threshold of the breached doors. She didn't turn around. She just looked over her shoulder, the shadows of the corridor catching the sharp angles of her face. The final illusion was about to break. 47 ships, Naomi repeated softly. She turned fully to face the chamber. Is that what your intelligence told you, that the Aegis and her vanguard were the Earth Navy? The silence in the room became absolute. A creeping, paralyzing dread began to sink into the chest of every delegate present. Let me tell you what happens on a death world when you give a species of apex predators 300 years of absolute peace, infinite system resources, and a singular unified purpose. Naomi said, her voice dropping to a low rhythmic hum. We didn't build 47 ships, counselors. The fleet that annihilated the Xylar Grand Armada in 18 minutes was not our military. She let the words hang in the air, watching the realization dawn on the faces of the aliens. That was our diplomatic escort. A collective shudder ran through the amphitheater. The Speaker of the Council slumped back in his hoverpod, all the color draining from his feathers. If 47 ships were a diplomatic escort, what did the actual military look like? Behind the Oort cloud of our solar system, Naomi said, revealing the ultimate terrifying truth, sits the United Earth Home Fleet, 700,000 dreadnoughts, 2 million automated kinetic strike platforms. Enough atomic ordnance to crack every planet in this assembly into gravel. We didn't isolate ourselves to protect us from you. She pointed a finger at the floor. We isolated ourselves to protect you from us. Until we were absolutely sure we wouldn't burn the galaxy down just because we could. Naomi stepped back into the corridor. The heavy boots of her Marines shifted, preparing to march out. The debt to the Valari is paid. Their children will live. KL and his scientists will face human justice on Earth. As for the rest of you, she looked across the room one last time. We are not conquerors. We are not interested in your empires. If you leave us in peace, we will be the greatest friends you have ever known. But understand this and carve it into the walls of this chamber so you never forget if you ever attempt to commit genocide again. If you ever threaten the weak, the innocent, or the allies of humanity, her eyes went dead. We will not send an escort next time. We will open the gates and we will end you. Naomi cross-turned and walked into the smoke. The black armored Marines fell in step behind her, dragging the broken Xylar architects into the dark. The Galactic Council was left in silence. The era of their unquestioned rule was dead. The galaxy had a new apex predator, and it was terrifyingly moral. 6 months later, on the surface of the Valari homeworld, the wind blew through the capital city. But it no longer howled through empty streets. The city was alive. The orbital rings were glowing with the blue light of reconstruction aided by massive United Earth engineering frigates. Down in the central plaza, the fountains were running again. The air was filled with the sound of music of construction and, most importantly, of voices. Ambassador Naomi Cross stood in the center of the plaza wearing a civilian jacket against the cool breeze. She was looking up at a massive spire of black marble that stretched hundreds of feet into the sky. Carved into the stone in microscopic, precise lettering were 50,000 Valari names. A small tug on her sleeve broke her concentration. She looked down. Standing next to her was a young Valari girl. Her scales were a brilliant, healthy emerald green. Her 4 eyes were wide with curiosity, completely devoid of the dull gray sickness that had plagued her people for generations. "Excuse me," the little girl said, her voice a soft melodic chirp translated through Naomi's earpiece. "My teacher said you are a human." Naomi smiled, kneeling down, so she was at eye level with the child. The heavy weight of the galactic politics, the threats, the violence, it all melted away in the face of this single healthy child. "I am," Naomi said softly. The little girl pointed a slender finger up at the sky where the massive dark silhouette of the Aegis was visible against the clouds, keeping watch. "My teacher said your ships are very scary. She said everyone in the stars is afraid of you now." The girl tilted her head. "Are you scary?" Naomi looked at the black ship in the sky. She thought of Admiral Thorne's restraint. She thought of Silas Mercer's sleepless nights. She thought of the promise humanity had made in the dark and the lengths they had gone to keep it. "To some people, yes," Naomi told the child honestly. "We can be very scary, but not to you." "Why not?" the little girl asked. Naomi reached out and gently touched the black marble of the monument. "Because a long time ago, your people showed us how to be brave. And humans—" Naomi smiled, a genuine warm expression that didn't reach the halls of the Galactic Council. "Humans always protect their friends." The little girl smiled brightly, her forearms wrapping around Naomi in a sudden tight hug before she turned and ran back to a group of laughing children playing in the plaza. Naomi stood up. She took a deep breath of the clean living air. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, and deeply flawed. The fear of humanity would eventually fade, replaced by politics, borders, and new conflicts. There would be other wars, other plagues, other monsters hiding in the dark corners of the universe. But humanity was ready. They had repaid their debt. But the real work, the work of being the shield in the dark, had only just begun. And for the first time in 300 years, the galaxy was not going to face the darkness alone.